Stephanie Baker again with On the Couch, and I am the executive director and founder of Life in Abundance. We are a nonprofit counseling ministry located here in the upstate, and we believe that by offering counseling to families, we strengthen families in the upstate, which strengthens our community. Want to remind everybody why we are doing the On the Couch podcast. There are basically three areas we want to focus on. The first area, of course, is counseling and various topics. There's a lot of mystery sometimes for people about the counseling environment. A lot of people have grown up hearing that we don't tell people our stuff. And so counseling feels a little bit like an invasion of your privacy. And so we're going to address throughout different episodes various concerns people may have about going to counseling because it can be scary if you've never done that before. But we hope as we are going through everything that we're going to be talking about with various counselors, not just those on my team, but some that are outside of my team. We have a strong referral network. We're hoping to take away some of the mystery about counseling and talk about some of the more pertinent topics. And certainly, if it applies to you or someone that you know and love, you may want to forward the podcast to them so they can listen as well. The second thing we focus on would be functional nutrition and functional health. And of course, we are talking to experts in either of those areas. If you've listened previously, you've heard me talk to a couple of different functional medicine providers about varying topics because we believe that you are body, soul, and spirit being. And when one of those areas is tweaked, the others are affected as well. And so we don't just look at somebody as just a group of symptoms. What we talk about would be your entire your lifestyle when you come in. We talk about things that can be helpful for nutrition, things that can be helpful with supplements maybe that you've never thought about, those types of things. And then the third thing would be to highlight other ministries in the area that have wonderful resources and you may not be aware of them. And so we want to give a platform to some of those resources so that you can learn about them as well. And maybe you've heard about some of them, but you didn't really know quite what they did. So it's our goal to bring those to the forefront. Today, we are so blessed. We have with us Holly Spiars. I'll do a formal introduction in just a second, but she has also been part of the Life in Abundance team a long time ago. We loved having her here on our team while she was with us, and just so proud of her and everything that she's done. She is now the founder and director of Restoring Hope Counseling. Holly is a licensed professional counselor and supervisor, and she has a master's of divinity in counseling from New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. And we thought it would be a great idea today for us to talk about grief. And so, Holly, welcome. I am so thrilled that you are with us. It's awesome to have you and great to see you. Welcome aboard On the Couch.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity and I'm excited to talk with you.
Yeah. So it seems like lately we here are having people come in with they're grieving to just say
Yeah.
that they're grieving. And first of all, let's just say that we know that grief isn't necessarily about the death of a loved one or
Right.
someone that you cared about. It can be the loss of a job, the loss of a marriage. It doesn't have to be physical death of another human being. And I think that that is grossly ignored with
Yes.
with a lot of people. They don't see that as okay, somebody got laid off after working at a company for 15 years. They're going to grieve the loss of what went with that in most cases, the history, the possibilities, that kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
what would you say to us about um, when somebody is around us? I think also the tendency for a lot of people is to try to make it better, to try to say things to make it better, and then we end up as people, we end up a little bit like Job's friends,
Yep.
and unfortunately, and I think it's hard for people to just sit with somebody in their grief. Talk to us about a little bit about that. What are your thoughts?
I think the biggest thing is you have to be comfortable with pain and
Mm,
to recognize that in our world, we are going to experience suffering. Like it's a guarantee. It's not something to avoid. It's not something to shy away from. Of course, I'm not also suggesting that people run to it, but it
right.
is something that we have to be okay with the fact that it exists and not try to fix it because there are certain things I think that grief really reflects a deeper issue of redemption. And so it's a reflection of a broken world. And this is not fixable by us, only by God Himself. And
Wow.
we're going to feel that. And
Mhm.
we're going to feel that depth. There was no need for grief before the fall.
Right.
There was no need for sadness. But because of that, we experience the effects of sin in the world, and therefore we're going to experience grief in any capacity. Like you said, there's the loss of job, loss of position, loss of a relationship, a loss of a pet. There are like so many types of losses.
Yes.
Even change in your life can
Yes.
represent loss because you're no longer able to do something that you used to be able to do, or you're no longer in the position to um for example, I was talking with a friend the other day about running, and she's like, I can't run anymore, or I can't run as much, and it doesn't feel good in my body and all. And I'm like, I love running too, and I haven't been able to do it for a few years either, because if I do, I'm going to paralyze myself. So let's not do that.
Right.
So, but you can grieve. I think there are just various levels of grief, and it hits us differently. Certainly, death is going to be the largest feeling, the heaviest feeling one. But in all of them, we have to address them, because if we don't, then anxiety and depression are going to be prevalent. Either one, people will go either route if
Wow.
grief is not allowed.
And I think, I go back even to my childhood and thinking about moving. We moved about
Yeah.
3 times, and 2 of those moves were 6 months apart. We moved from the South, where the culture is a little bit was a little bit different. The temperature certainly was different, wasn't used to
Mhm.
snow, and we moved north, to 2 other cities within 6 months, and I grieved, but I was told, "That's enough. Like, everything will
Mhm.
be fine. You're going to meet new friends," and so on and so forth. I realize now as an adult that that was not allowing me to process, and there are things that came out of it that were good, but I still wasn't allowed to process in that moment the
Mhm.
difficulty that I was having leaving behind friends that I'd known since, grammar school, and I was afraid. I was scared. Am I going to fit
Of
in?
course.
What's this going to be like? So I think it's important, for parents that are listening too. Let your kids grieve.
Yes.
I mean,
Let them
you
have the
have
hard and heavy emotions.
yes. I mean, you have the adult ability to rationalize. You've also got experience that they don't have. And
Mhm.
so let them grieve, let them process loss. Because if you don't, they're going to grow up to be adults who don't understand what grief is,
Right.
or how to allow themselves to process that. I know that I've had clients that they are afraid to grieve because they're afraid. It's so overwhelming to them. They feel like if they start, they're never going to stop.
Yep. I
Yeah.
actually have that as a myth about grief that that I like to address, and that once we start, we won't stop. And I kind of like to counter that a little bit with, do you anticipate laughing perpetually? Because we don't do that either.
Wow.
So
Wow.
we're not going to do one or the other too much, but the longer that we keep it in, the more intense it will be when once it's released.
Yes.
So there is some truth to, I won't be able to stop initially, because
Right.
if you've been pressing it down for so long, you're going to have probably an intense response once you allow it to release. And that's okay. It won't stay that way.
Right.
It will get better, but you have to at least allow it to start.
Agreed. And I think it's important to remind, everyone too, with grief is trauma most of the time,
Mhm.
right? There's a loss. It's traumatic to us on some level. And with trauma, we forget that there's a starting and a finishing, especially with depending on the type of trauma you've been through. You may dissociate for a while. which makes it even tougher to remember that there's a start and a finish. But for things like what we're talking about right now, um, I think reminding ourselves this this will stop. As you said, we don't laugh perpetually either, which is a great way to bookend that. There's a start and then there's a finish. Now, does that mean we'll never have sadness over the person that we've lost or regret over something that we wish we would have done differently? No, we can still have that, but it's a little bit like waves in the oceans. If you've ever been knocked down by waves, the waves are coming fast and furious, and it's hard to stand up. Eventually, tide goes out, and there's still waves, but they're not as frequent and they're not as intense. And that's sort of how I like to describe grief to people, the process. I know
Right,
that I know that the grieving process, we used to look at about 5 stages or 6 stages of grief, and that's changed. I mean, that's
right. It
been
has.
changed around. What would you want to tell people now about sort of how the grief process works for most people?
I well, first I like to look at how Jesus grieved. I think that is the best starting point, and we miss a lot if we don't pay attention to that because I think we wind up expecting ourselves to be holier than him
Mhm.
in how we're encountering grief. And so, one of the most common and popular ones is where Jesus wept after Lazarus, after hearing the death of Lazarus, and he wept. And there was a humanity involved in that. I mean, he was about to raise him from the grave, but he met the grief of Lazarus's sisters and his own grief, and just all of that came together in his humanity. But one of my favorite passages about him specifically with grief is after he hears about John the Baptist being beheaded. And that's in Matthew 14. Matthew 14, verse 13, it says, "Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself."
Mm.
And giving us that permission to withdraw in response to a loss, I think is important. I have witnessed many times in particularly in Christian circles, the intention is well-meaning that, hey, we need to get them moving, we needed to get them out, we need to in response to a death, we need to
Right.
have them continue, like, they can't basically don't let them be by themselves. But I think this gives a little bit of a natural response that it's
I love
okay to
that.
let them withdraw,
Yes.
actually. He
Yes.
doesn't stay withdrawn. So if somebody stays withdrawn over a long period of time, we're gonna be more concerned. But
Mhm.
initially, it is a normal response to isolate a little bit
Right.
and to get alone, to be able to experience the weight and the fullness of
I
that grief.
love that.
Does everybody need that? Not necessarily, but I think it's okay to give people the room for that if that is what they're needing. Um, because I think what happens is that if we don't allow for that, then staying busy with people avoids it longer.
Yes.
Because there have been instances, and I mean, it happens a lot, where people are overwhelmed. I'm referring specifically to death, but people are overwhelmed with they have food coming in and they're flooded with company, and all that goes on for a few days, and they're in just kind of a whirlwind, and then it stops, and then everything hits. And and that's okay, but it is that withdrawing and isolating in that response to grief. So I think first we have to be okay with responding in a similar fashion of weeping if we need to weep, of um, withdrawing if we need to withdraw. Start there,
Yes.
and then carefully select the people that you're going to allow in to
Yes.
be the arms and feet of Jesus to you, to serve you and comfort you. But that is
Talk a little bit more, if you will, about that. That's not being ugly. That is not being
right.
judgmental of people. It's recognizing those that are life-giving
Mhm.
and those that aren't, right?
Correct. Because you don't need in a state of already overwhelming emotion, you don't need somebody coming in that's going to exhaust you further.
Yes.
So being able to pinpoint who are the people that when you're around them, they're encouraging to you and they are life-giving and they do like you do walk away from those conversations and those interactions with a little bit of pep in your step or a little bit more joy or something like that, just on a day-to-day average basis. They're not
Right.
necessarily going to be the people who are going to come in and grief and give you platitudes. They're going to be the people who are going to come in and be comfort to you, most likely.
Yes.
So I think that's important to just kind of who are those people? Who are those people who are not going to say trite things in
Uh,
response to
yes.
grief? Like, what are some ones I've heard? Better that you found out now instead of later, things like that. Or
Right.
they're in a better place now and
Right.
stuff like that, that just, I know it's well intended, but it's not comforting.
Right. Agreed. I think we need to master, "I'm so sorry for your loss."
Mm-hmm.
And that's it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, maybe and even this is tricky because if you're like, "How can I best support you right now?" That person may not know.
Yeah.
They're in shock. Um, so what would you recommend that somebody who wants to be there for someone who's grieving, what would you recommend would be a good sentence for them?
Oh, so I'll preface this with in seminary, one of our professors had us do a lot of role plays, and it was the integration of psychology and theology and spirituality. That was the class. And he would give us scenarios all the time. And we had to give our first response to that scenario. And so he gave us, there's a scenario of a couple comes in and their son had just run over their daughter and it killed their daughter. Like that was the scenario. It was the Stephen Curtis Chapman scenario, if you remember that from years ago.
Yes.
He said, your first response cannot be I. You cannot say anything that says I in the sentence.
Wow.
Who is that challenging?
Yes, it is.
It is so challenging. And so a lot of it is being able to just pinpoint what is unimaginable in so many ways and being able to then the sentence is not the sentence needs to be case by case based on who how well do you know that person,
Right.
but what you're going through is so hard. This feels so heavy. This feels impossible. It feels unimaginable. Like being able to just kind of call out even the heaviness of it. So I think even if you're able to go, wow, how are you?
Love it.
And
Yeah.
not, yeah, the more you can put it back with them of like, how are you really?
And then not feel like you have to have an answer as
Right.
somebody who's sitting with another person because it isn't for you to fix. It
Mm-mm.
isn't, and you can't fix it. You might
Mm-hmm.
want to, but you can't. And so just to be there,
Yeah.
just to be there.
And we're supposed to weep with those who weep,
Yes.
called to cry with others.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
it is, I mean, I'm not saying you have to put on a performance, but
Right.
it's okay to do that, to just sit and cry and weep with the person
Yes.
because what they are experiencing is hard. I have had so many clients that when they tell me something that's so hard and heavy and so grievous to them, and I tear up and
Yeah.
cry, I'm not like bawling or anything, but when I
Right.
do, they'll come back to me later and go, that was so validating. I was not seeing how difficult and how hard what I was going through was until I saw how you responded to it.
Yes.
And it just like that is the freedom that we get as fellow believers, particularly to come alongside and weep with those who weep.
Yes.
And like that's your position, that's your role. It's
I
not you
think,
fix it.
and with counselors, I think that there's a lot of training that says you're not to show emotion. And
Mhm.
I don't believe that.
I
That's
push
not.
that out the window. Like that
Yeah.
is not
Yeah.
okay in my room.
Right. Right. Because we are all human. You don't
Mhm.
sit in your chair and I don't sit in mine because we're perfect at everything. We're not.
Right.
We're human beings. And so if
Right.
we lose that, how are we to connect? Now, I'm not saying that we get drawn in to despair and whatever. That's not going to help the client, but
Right.
to show it's obvious that you are hurting.
Yes.
It's obvious that that is a real thing that you're experiencing. I say all the time, clients come to my office, most of them to be heard,
Mhm.
because it's the only place for many of them that their voice is heard. Um,
Yep.
so, so there's a helplessness in grief.
Mm.
What do we do about that helplessness? How do we approach that in our own lives? What do we do with that?
That's a really good question. I say we look to hope. We acknowledge the helplessness, and then that's where hope comes in. If we stay in a state of helplessness, that is going to turn into depression. That's what will happen. Um, and that's where you do wind up sometimes with clinical depression as a
Mhm.
result of unmet grief or unresolved grief, I guess is a good way to put it. Um, but looking for hope in the midst of it, there's a verse, and I wish I could remember the reference off the top of my head, but that says that we grieve as those that do not have, we grieve as those who have hope. Something along those.
Not as those
Yes,
who do not have hope.
yes, thank you.
Right. Yeah.
Um, the words started getting jumbled in my head, but we as believers have a special connection, option, comfort to us that we
Mhm.
have hope that this isn't it. This isn't all there is to life. And so we can pull that out and look to redemption, that knowing that everything we grieve about now will one day be redeemed, all of it, all of it. And that's where we can find hope. And that's what kind of helps to pull us out or to anchor us a little bit to keep us from sinking so deep down with the grief. But we have to acknowledge that we are helpless in it, that
Yes.
I'm not saying skip over it. That's part of the problem is too many people are trying to skip over it, trying to fix it. And I think the way people try to fix it is through anxiety because it's like if I can anticipate a loss, I can fix it and prevent it from happening. And therefore, I'm going to do everything I can, and everything is a danger. And so then anxiety bubbles up. But that's what we need to do though, is look for hope. Where is our hope? Are we looking to Jesus, who knows very well grief? He's a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. I
Yes.
was thinking about that this morning. I'm like, it says acquainted, but really, I mean,
He was more than acquainted.
yes, he like fully embodied grief
Yes.
better than any
Yes.
of us. And he's the one that we get to have hope in, that he will redeem it. He will redeem all that is broken. And that's how we can have just that image and picture in our heads when helplessness comes up. Like, it's okay that I can't. It's okay that I can't fix it. It's okay that I can't do it. I don't like it, but it's okay that I can't because I know he will.
I think you said something about if we don't acknowledge the helplessness, it can go into clinical depression,
Mhm.
right? And when we acknowledge the helplessness, I think what I'm hearing is also that that leads me some to acceptance,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
I can't change it. Um, and it's not an acceptance of, oh well, life goes on. It's
Right.
an acceptance of where I find myself in that helplessness.
Yes.
And there we talked earlier, to sort of bring this full circle, we talked earlier about there being a beginning and a theoretical end to the
Mhm.
to the process. I think that acceptance piece brings us even closer to understanding that it's for a time. Um,
Yeah.
you know, when we think about grief, Um, I'm wondering how much does, because I'm thinking back on my own life,
Mhm.
how much does how you've seen other people in attachment figures, how much does that play into how you grieve?
Ooh. That's a good question. Particularly for kids, they're going to respond a lot based on what they witness. And
Mhm,
so I've worked with plenty of parents who they are going through something very painful and they are trying to hide it from their kids. They're trying to not be sad in front of them and not cry in front of them and things like that. And I'm like, your kids know something's wrong. It is okay for you to cry about it in front of
mm,
them. They need to see that. They need to see that you are having a natural human response to what is painful
mhm.
and that you're not just trying to um, be strong and barrel through it. And they need to see the humanity of that. And
It's
I
a
think there's a
teaching.
healthy way of doing that. It's not, I think those parents are very well meaning in wanting to protect their kids from that.
Mhm.
However, and I think the reason why a lot of times is because maybe they experience the opposite, where somebody, an attachment figure for them,
Mhm.
overwhelmed them with it
Yes,
and expected the kid to then in turn be the comfort to the parent
yes.
and put all that responsibility of their emotions on them. And so then they're scared to do that to their own kids.
Mhm.
And that's the fear that's at play. And I think there's just a healthier way of doing it where you express to your kid, I'm really sad about this right now. And so I'm going to cry. And it's okay for mommy to cry. It's okay for daddy to cry. Like, this is a sad situation and it is okay for us to be sad about it.
I love that, and I do agree, that it's typically the polar, that spectrum, like polar ends of the spectrum with how clients have seen their
Hmm.
family members grieve, if they've seen it at all.
Right.
And some of them, if you ask, how was grief handled in your family? It wasn't.
Yeah.
We didn't have time for that. It was seen as weak.
Yep.
I've heard that before, versus also hearing mom or dad went to bed and didn't get out of bed for months on end, you
Yep.
know. And so you talked about anxiety also with people. I don't want to be that. And I don't
Mm.
want to do that, to my kids. So, but I love that you're calling that out, that it is okay to show them. And really the end result of that is then they're not afraid of it. They
Hmm.
see it as something that's real, that is not out of control. Um, but you also stated about the kid not being the comforter.
Right.
Talk more about that.
Yeah, our kids aren't responsible for our emotions. And but I think some of them are naturally going to want to comfort, and that's okay.
Mhm.
But not expecting them to step up where you feel like you're falling apart is
Right.
important. I worked with I've worked with kids before, particularly in divorce situations where
Mhm.
they would express that they were scared to tell mommy or daddy, whichever one, they were scared to tell them they were sad about it because, or talk about it because that parent would cry or that parent would be, they didn't want to make their parent cry was the bottom line of that. And I would tell them the tears are already there. Mommy and daddy are already sad. And it's helpful for you to be able to express to them that you're not causing it, it's already there. They need the
I
freedom.
love that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's an important clarification.
yeah, everybody needs to have the freedom to shed a tear, the freedom to express sadness at all ages.
Mhm. So, all right. So, switching gears just a little bit
Mhm.
here. let's say that I've gone through a traumatic loss, the loss of a spouse or a parent. Um, how do I know if my grief is prolonged? What are some things, like, in other words, that I'm not moving through at a normal pace or a normal setting? What are
The
some signs?
the main issue, and there is now in our diagnostic manual, there is a thing called prolonged grief disorder. It is in there now. But the main thing to be aware of is functionality. And that's the case with most of the mental health disorders is how does it affect your functionality in this world? And so if it is still affecting your ability to function months after the event, like you're still having a hard time getting out of bed, you're still having a hard, and when I say hard time, I mean like you're in bed half the day,
Right,
not
right.
just those of us
Not
who struggle to get
showering,
up in the
not
morning period.
right,
Right, right. Just that ongoing, it still feels like the first week. And that is happening more times than not.
okay,
Of course, there's more clinical jargon to that, but
right,
that would be the main thing I would be looking at is what is the
functionality.
functionality of this
Okay.
person to determine prolonged grief. Because here's the thing, grief is well, there is some aspect of it, a beginning and end, like with the trauma and stuff like that. Grief will pop up throughout your life. Like
Right,
you will never not grieve about something. It's just not
right,
going to be continuous. My aunt died a couple of years ago, and when my one of my girls wears a piece of clothing that she had given them. Like there's sometimes that I see that and I notice it and I tear up. And it's I miss my aunt. And so and
right,
my daughters do too. And they had a relationship with her as well. So they're going to randomly talk about her out of the blue. They're going to mention her. And so but I'm not in a state of grief ongoing. But I do have moments where I'm grieving.
right,
I'm grieving that loss. I'm sad that
right,
she's not gonna be part of our functions like, she's not gonna be part of my life anymore.
right,
And
right.
so, that's sad, and it's okay to do that. So,
Mhm.
I that's that difference between that continuing, ongoing, I can't function in life,
Right, right,
and when I think of them, I'm sad.
right. And I think that, yeah, that's a very good way to sort of frame that it is like, my father died when he was very young, and he died in 1985. It was very unexpected. And although I'm not in tears every day, there are
Mhm.
special moments, there are holidays. There's really not a day that goes by that I don't think about him.
Right.
His picture is plastered all over my house, pictures, so I do see him. But there are days, especially if I'm having a difficult day, there are things I wish that I could just pick up the phone and call him and talk to him about and ask him.
Mhm. Yep.
Um, you know, I think too, when we grieve, I think it's important that we sort of, at least in a counseling setting, this is what I have my clients do. I want you to list everything that you feel like you've lost. I can't
Mm,
grieve what I haven't
mhm.
identified, right?
Right.
And so it sort of opens a floodgate, which is what it's designed to do, of things. It's not just the person, it's the loss of, as you were talking about your aunt, the loss of that person seeing your girls grow up or
Mhm.
being part of future events. It's the loss of, there are people who have lost children. It's the loss of seeing their child grow up and
Yes.
get married, and all of that. What so possibility is a loss, and
Right.
I don't think people easily identify the possibilities. I think they tend to focus on the right here and right now, but we're grieving an entire human being.
Mhm.
So we're grieving all parts of that human being, and we have a tendency, by the way, to make people saints or demons once they've passed,
Correct. Yep.
right? But that person was that person had things that could get on your nerves. That person had things that could move you to tears that were wonderful. Um, that was a whole person
Mm.
in the case of grieving a person, it's a whole person. So there were possibilities, there were things unrecognized, unrealized. I think it's important that we remember those two things that, or that we identify those things as well. Um,
Yes,
so
definitely.
yeah.
Yeah.
So um anything else that you would say to somebody right now who has maybe just suffered a loss,
Mm,
or is young in the phase of the loss?
mm. I would say, and I don't mean to sound trite in this at all, but that Jesus knows it. He knows your pain and he's sad with you. Like he grieves death.
Yes,
He conquered it, but he grieves
yes,
what we experience as well.
right,
That death was never the intention.
right. That is so, so important. Um, my counselor, and every counselor should have their own counselor. I say this
Right?
to my clients. You go to a counselor who doesn't have his or her own counselor, run, because we
Yep.
all need it. But my counselor has actually shared that very same thing. And I just am very like driven and focused and plow forward. And when he said exactly what you said to me, it was like he hit me with a 2 by 4. I had to stop and go, wait a minute. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's right. Um, that's right. So
Do you know in the Gospels, we don't see anything about Jesus laughing or anything like that, but we see depictions of him crying
yeah.
and being
Wow.
sad.
Wow. Wow.
It is literally Christ-like to cry.
That is so good. I love what you've brought to the table today on this. It's remarkable. Um, it's seeing things with fresh eyes too,
Mhm.
because I don't think that I've ever heard a sermon that talked about that.
Right?
I mean, we've talked about those books of the Bible for other things, but I don't think I've ever, as I'm sitting here thinking about, I don't think I've ever heard a sermon on grief with some of the things that you have brought out today. This is super, super helpful. So, Holly, I want to be respectful of your time in the audience as well. We're going to bring this to a close, but if
Sure.
somebody wants to work with you or any other counselors at Restoring Hope Counseling, what's the best way for that person to get a hold of you?
The best way is to go to our website, which is arestoredhope.com, and
Okay.
they can fill out an inquiry on there to get in touch with us.
Okay. Um, about how long does it take to get in? Do you guys have a wait list right now?
We don't. It just depends on who they're going to see,
Gotcha.
but we can get them scheduled within a week or two, typically.
Okay. Okay. And your facility is located in Anderson.
Correct.
Wonderful. Okay. You guys are doing some amazing things. We're so super proud
Thank
of
you.
Restoring Hope. So, and thank you again. I would love to have you back, specifically to talk about the subject of divorce. Would you be
Okay.
willing to come back?
Sure.
Awesome.
I
I
don't
just
know.
think
I don't
I
know how much I know about it, but
I think there are some things that we can talk about that might help couples that are going through that with their kids and how
Yeah,
they are handling parenting with the kids in that.
yeah.
So you said some things today. I was like, that really even applies to that situation. So we'd love to have you come back. We'll work that out. But thank you so much again for taking your time to be part of On the Couch.
Well, thank you for having me.